Someone has asked about microphones. You will not need a microphone. If you have questions, please put it into the chat feature. That's the little comment bubble that you will see on your screen. Click that and you can type to everyone. Everyone on this will see that communication. You can say hello to each other, or if you certainly then if you're saying to everyone, we here in the room will know that you have a problem with the audio or need some assistance. So we will get to that. And that is how you will ask your questions too. Okay. Well, the appointed time has come, and I sincerely appreciate that all of you have joined us. We are recording today's session, so you will not be on audio or video, but we are recording the session, and I wanted to let you know that. We will post the recording on our website so it can be reviewed later or reviewed by members of your team that might need the information at a later date. Give us a day or two to get that posted so that it takes a little bit for us to get that video and get it edited and posted, but it will be there in the next couple of days. My name is Tammy White. I'm Deputy State Examiner with the State Board of Accounts. With me today, we have several people. Pam Barber is here. Mitch Wilson is here. They are our GAP efficiency team. They are going to be giving a lot of the presentation, but we also asked for help from the county directors and the city and town directors. So Todd Caldwell is here with Mike Crowley. Ricky Hofer is here with Stacy Burns, and we're using every bit of all of their assistance with this. This is our first, hopefully, of several GAP chats where we will get together with those of you who are reporting on a GAP basis and try to share information, certainly answer any questions that you have. Maybe not all will be in this same format. We may use different formats for different topics. If we want to have more discussion, we may open it up and use a slightly different format. But certainly appreciate that you've joined us today for this first session. You want to go to the agenda. Today we will be talking about the seized asset. Next one, I think it's on the next slide, Ricky. We will be talking about the seized asset memorandum that we sent to you a week ago via email. It was on the invite for this conference or for this virtual training. So hopefully you've had a time to review that, but if not, we'll be going over some of the elements of that, talking about the guidance that we're providing in that. We've done a little bit of legwork to see what you're going to have to do for your unit of government, and so that's the expectations for accountability and our experience. Then the directors will help us with some of the additional accountability elements that you might be curious about from this memorandum, and then I will close it out as we wrap things up and ask for your questions. Certainly, if you have questions throughout, you are welcome to put those in the chat at any time, and we will try to make sure that those get answered during the presentation. I'm going to go to the next slide. We're going to talk about a little bit about the learning objectives. For those of you who would like to claim continuing education credit for this session, it is recommended for 1 hour of accounting or governmental accounting credit. So you know that we have to go over our learning objectives for that, but it's not a bad thing that I'm trying to, try to portray what we're going to try to accomplish with this session. And I'm sure that you will get some valuable information regarding seizure and forfeiture provisions that are in Indiana Code, and what that may mean to you as you are trying to compile GAP financial statements going forward. If you do wish to get CPE, there is an evaluation form at a link that is provided in the chat feature. You will go to that evaluation form after the session fill out the evaluation, and you will have to enter 3 code words that you will see on various slides as we go through the presentation. Please record the 3 words that you see pop up on the slides. So that you will have those for the evaluation after the session. After that, we will get those evaluations, and if you have included the code words there, we will then send out certifications for your continuing education credit. Everyone seem to be connected okay? All right. With that, I am going to turn it over for the first part of our presentation to Pam Barber. Go to the next slide.
Okay, thank you. And good morning. We're glad that you joined us. Okay, the State Board of Accounts had a question brought to our attention earlier this summer that could affect GAAP city and county units concerning the issue of seized assets and the handling and reporting of these assets in relation to GAAP financial statements. The seized assets that we will be discussing are the assets that are being held in evidence or custody prior to the adjudication or forfeiture to these GAAP units. So these are the assets that have been seized but have not actually been dispersed or returned back to the original owner. So per GASB 84, paragraph 11, these assets would be reported as a fiduciary activity in the fiduciary fund statements if all 3 of the following criteria are met. The government holds the assets if the assets are not derived either solely from the government's own sourced revenues or from government mandated non-exchange transactions or voluntary non-exchange transactions, with the exception of pass-through grants and for which the government does not have administrative or direct financial involvement. And lastly, the assets are for the benefit of individuals and the government does not have administrative involvement with the assets or direct financial involvement with the assets. In addition, the assets are not derived from the government's provision of goods or services to those individuals. So that's a lot of information, and we can always go over that with you a little bit later. After the question was brought to our attention, Mitch and I interviewed multiple units across the state and discovered that the units were not handling the procedures for custody of the seized assets or the reporting of the assets once seized the same, or reporting to the fiscal officers consistently. So we felt that there was a need for clarification and guidance to you, the GAAP units, to begin reviewing your own seized assets processes and financial reporting. The next slide, please. So in our, on slide number 4, we have our first code word. The code word is seized. Make sure you put down code word number 1, seized. Next slide. So the memorandum that was dated August 2nd was summarized by the State Board of Accounts. We summarized the reporting of financial assets seized and held pending judgment. And we summarized the Indiana Code and GASB authoritative literature. And this was included in your invitation to the training for your reference. So the Indiana Code 34-24-1 describes the actions for forfeiture and the procedures that the county prosecutors should follow to either return the seized assets to the original owners or by court order distributes the assets in the forfeiture procedure. However, before the forfeiture disposition occurs, the city or county is acting as the custodian of the seized funds and should be reporting these as fiduciary activities in the fiduciary financial statements. The GASB Implementation Guide 20-1 in the Q&A that we have included on this slide discusses in an example of what happens with the county sheriff. They've seized cash and financial assets and they're depositing it into a separate bank account, and what should they do with this? The answer is yes, they should be reporting this in the county financial statements as a fiduciary activity. So this is part of GASB guidance, and this is what we want to bring to your attention. So I'm going to pass this on the next slide to Mitch.
Alrighty, thank you, Pam. So now that Pam has went over the memo a little bit more in depth, what does that mean for you specifically? So she touched on a couple things, but there's basically two key elements I want to focus on here. There's the determination and the handling of the assets, and then the reporting of those assets on your financial statements. So the first thing you're going to want to do, as Pam kind of mentioned, is determine if your local law enforcement are holding any assets that are seized and not returned or forfeited. And then if so, then you're going to want to find a dollar amount of those. Hopefully there's some record being kept of that, but Ricky's going to go in depth into that a little bit more later on. And then secondly, once you have created, and I guess not created, but found that dollar amount, you're just going to want to be ensured that it's included on your financial statements. And in doing so, you're just going to want to include that within your fiduciary funds. There are two caveats to that though. The first one is that unless you can show that GASB 84 paragraph 11 does not apply, which is what Pam kind of just read off there for you, which is just GASB's criteria for your fiduciary activity. And then the other one is if that dollar amount identified is not material. So yes, next slide for me. Okay, so building on that determination of the seized assets is the handling of those assets, to which Indiana Code 342424B denotes three options here. The first one is that they're placed under seal. An example of this is at a sheriff's department, the seized assets are held within an evidence locker, a vault, or a safe. The second option is if they're removed to a place that's designated by the court. Example here is the seized funds are remitted to a clerk for deposit into a separate bank account. This way you can ensure that any interest is accounted for accordingly so that they're not commingled with any other funds. And then your third option is another agency comes in and takes custody of those assets. And where an example of that is federal forfeiture, where the federal government would come in and account for those assets. And then that last point there is just some further guidance for your associated bulletin if you do want to go and look that up. Then I believe we have a code word here. Yes, so there's your second code word for today, and that is custody. We'll give you a second to write that down. Okay, so before we move on here, I just want to recap what our recommended actions would be in regards to the memo. So again, you're going to want to inquire with your law enforcement regarding any seized assets, and then ensure that they're being held within one of these three ways. And then you're going to be sure that they're accounted for accordingly on your financial statements. So hopefully there's some sort of figure you're able to derive from that, and just show that within your fiduciary funds on your financial statements. So now if we can go to the next slide. All right, so as Pam had mentioned, while compiling all this information, we inquired with a number of units and just to get a feel for how the seized assets were being accounted for. And we just wanted to share a few of the findings with you today. I'm going to run through two of them, and then Pam's going to run through two with her experiences. So findings 1 and 2 here, they're both very similar and both very straightforward. In finding 1, the seized funds were held with the sheriff in a safe until judgment. And in finding 2, very similar, but instead they were just held in a separate bank account as at the sheriff's department. And then next, the funds, once after that judgment was made, the funds were then transferred to the treasurer in finding 1 and the clerk in finding 2. And then simply they were just paid by the treasurer per the court order for finding 1, and then per the clerk for finding 2. So those are both very straightforward and acceptable from our viewpoint, as the assets here were placed under seal at the sheriff's department. But findings 3 and 4 are a little bit more complex, so I'll hand that back to Pam and she'll run through those with you.
Okay. And finding 3, the funds were seized by, this was a city, they were seized by the police chief. They were held in custody at the police station. Then they were transferred to the city on a weekly basis. The funds were maintained by the city in a separate fund on their ledger. And in this particular case, they are reconciled monthly and annually. They are also recorded in their AFR and also on their ACFR, actually. And so they are being accounted for correctly with their detail and being reported. So they are being held, and then whenever they do receive their court order, that they receive that court order and they pay it out through their claims procedures. The finding 4 is with the county. The seized funds are being held with the sheriff's department for 2 weeks. The funds then are being converted to a cashier's check and transferred to the auditor. The auditor receipts these funds into the general fund as other receipts. The problem with this example is there is no detail keeping track of these funds, and there's no way to reconcile or report these funds accurately, and they are being reported as part of the general fund, but not as custodial or not in their fiduciary funds. So these need to be looked at a little bit more. And Ricky.
Okay. All right, so I'm just gonna turn it over to me. So as this came together, Todd and I and Mike and Stacy all worked together to come up with ideas of how to get you started on accounting for these seized assets. But to start with, we really do, you do need to follow the procedures that are outlined in the statute here. So 3424.12 outlines your chain of custody. It's very important. We want to work within that system. So you're going to start with that. You've got something in place. We also want to go and talk to our old favorite, which is internal controls. We talk about it all the time. This is no different. So we want you to develop, we want you to implement, we want you to monitor them, and we need you to document them. Okay, so just like you do in any of your other funds that you are accounting for, we would want to see the same thing here with these seized funds. Now, we have seen, as they've told about different examples, we've seen how they are being held within a bank account in some instances. Others, they are held under, inside a safe or in a locked room. It really is up to you and how that you are working forward to that. We just need to make sure that it is safeguarded, right? When you take in any of these seized assets, cash is probably the easiest one to talk about. But no matter what you're taking in, we want to see a log, okay? You're gonna log that stuff that you are taking in. You're keeping inventory of it. Just like anything else that you have, you know exactly what you have on hand at any given time. Again, cash is the easiest. We did come up with some things that we thought would be really kind of helpful, and we've listed them on the slide here to be able to track, who you've received it from, when you received it, when it was released, all of those things. The thing that really comes into question has to do with your real and personal property. So we know that not only do you take cash, sometimes vehicles are seized. We were thinking jewelry, for example, would be something that might be seized. These things still hold value, and that as we were talking about it and we were looking at it, it's not something that we think you would need to go and get a value on those items throughout the year. But you do need to have those items that you're holding at 12/31 assessed at that time. We need to have a fair market value for anything that you're holding. This would just be, an estimate. It's going to be on a reasonable basis. Okay, so you don't want to say you've got a Cadillac Escalade and you're going to go over here and use Kelley Blue Book on one, but you've got a different kind of car, and we're going to go look at eBay and see what our best price is. So whatever you choose, we want to see it consistently applied for your estimate of this fair market value. We know that you collect a lot of other things. It's probably good to even mention sometimes drugs are seized. There would not be a value on those. So, obviously that's not something we are looking for. But at the end, we want to see that you are reconciling what you have, what you've turned over to the auditor, what you've released, so that you know at all times what you're holding. So there needs to be procedures for reconciling those items, those amounts. We know there's going to be a lot of things out here that you could collect that you don't know. We want to kind of give you just kind of a starting point. We think this could get defined a little bit more as we go down the road. So we want you to call us at the end of the year if you have something crazy, like you see the house or just something huge. Call us. We'll talk you through, give you some ideas of how to move forward on that. So now we've had, this assets have been seized, they've been accounted for, now it's the end of the year, and now it needs to be reported to the fiscal officer, correct? So again, cash, easiest one to do. You will, tell them what you have. How much cash are you holding? It would be, again, reported as a fiduciary fund. We get back into the real and the personal property here. So again, you're going to be looking for those values. There needs to be, again, procedures designed and implemented to go through all these reports, what you're handing off. One thing I want to talk about, and I think it was mentioned earlier, was materiality. That is something that's going to have to be looked at. I don't know if your police chief or your sheriff may not know what that is, so it's probably going to come down to you to determine what that materiality is and how it's reported going forward. But you want to document it, so if it is not material, you're not including it, document your reasonings behind that, but we just want to see that it was considered moving forward. Okay, I think I've got a code word. Oh, that's not the right button. Oh, let me go back. Is it there?
It's
Yes. There we go. Account. And then I think I am handing it back over to Tammy.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Yeah, so I know we went through several things rather quickly. Key takeaways. We are looking for materiality, so we don't expect that the sheriff's going to report or the police chief is going to report to the fiscal officer every time they seize personal property that might be worth $200. Those things are not going to rise to that level. But there does need to be a system, as Ricky pointed out through her research and with Todd. There is guidance in the bulletins about handling of seized assets prior to and through forfeiture if that does happen. We want to make sure that we're able to capture a number, a value to put onto the financial statements, and then we want to make sure that those values can be put into the fiduciary statements. So you'll have the asset, you will have, as the memorandum goes through, you will have the asset until there is a judgment. At that time, it can also become a liability, be payable to someone, whether that's to law enforcement for law enforcement costs or back to a rightful owner, possessor of that property. Until that time, it is just net position. It's part of your net assets that are just going to sit in your statements. You will have additions and deductions throughout the year, so there will be inflows and outflows of this seized assets to try to get you from, the beginning balance through to the ending balance. And so as you start to figure out how in your unit of government seized assets are accounted for, we just wanted you to have a place to go back to the memorandum for some guidance, and certainly contact any of us. Your city, town, county directors are happy to help you, as are Pam and Mitch and myself. It's out there, but we wanted to make sure that you had some guidance in your hands, as I'm not sure that GASB 84 was ever getting down to this level with so many new statutory gap units. We were trying to work on the big things first, and then this came to light. So we want to make sure you have some guidance for that. If you have questions, I know we did not invite the compilers and the private examiners to this, but they did receive the memorandum last week. They are professionals and certainly understand how the fiduciary activity works. They may not be quite as familiar with the state statute. So even if they have questions, we're happy to assist them, and they will be able to view this recording after the fact once it is posted on our website. It's really, this first one, we just wanted to make sure we could get all of you connected. So that was our priority for the first try, and we'll try to be more inclusive in the future as we work through our technologies. But at this time, I will open it up to any questions that you have. Do we have any questions in the chat? We'll do it rather quickly. Well, certainly you may not have as many questions until you actually start to work on compiling this number. I don't know that we've seen anyone put this on their financial statements in the custodial funds yet. We looked at a few of our gap statements. It may be small enough that it's in the miscellaneous, but we just could not clearly identify it anywhere in the custodial funds. That is where it will be within your fiduciary statements. If you remember, those have a statement of fiduciary net position, statement of changes in that fiduciary net position. So as you start to work through it and have those questions or concerns, reach out to any of us. And with that, we'll look for questions coming in either through email or by phone calls. We're always available, and certainly know where to find us. Check the website, and we'll be sending out the next information, maybe next quarter, for another gap chat. So, hang on.
I got a question. Can the original memo be sent to attendees?
Yes, we can resend the memorandum, and we can also send the PowerPoint. Are we going to post the PowerPoint?
I was thinking, do you want to post the memo and the PowerPoint with the recording?
Yes, we'll do that. So we will post the memorandum, and we'll post the PowerPoint presentation on our website along with the recording. So everyone will have access to that memorandum. It's certainly public, and we want the information to get out there. Just didn't want it to get out there ahead of you guys. So, all right, remember, if you want continuing education credit, you will need to use the link that is in the chat feature and insert your code words with your evaluation, and we will look to get those certificates out within the next 2 weeks. Seeing no further questions, we will let you all get back to your day. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Okay, we got a lot of thank yous.